Always happens after lunch where you make these mistakes. And we're back. There we go. And we're doing COMP2068. It's Advanced Web Programming in Winter 2016, Week 12, Part 1. I want to talk about that Angular stuff we talked about last week, and I want to wrap it into a project that we were kind of using before. Let me bring this up, grab the right one. So we're working with a project last week's, over the weeks called Mongo Demo. If you look online, there's one called Mongo Demo. I've made a new one called NG Mongo Demo, right? God, that's creative. Let's make it so that we put it up online, right? So I'm going to go into GitHub, and we're going to go to Georgian, and I'm going to add it up here. There's another one called auth to do, which is also an example of Angular, right? That's the old version. I'm going to give you the version that works with Passport Local Mongoose as opposed to the old Passport Local. And I wanted to give you that because probably most of your apps that you're running are running with Passport Local Mongoose, so might as well give you something that works with it all, right? And then talk about how I added it in and all the piece parts to it. So I need to make a repository space here, and we're going to call this COMP2068 ng Mongo Demo, right? Mongo Demo with Angular is what this really is. Let's do that. And I want to take these two last lines here for a second. I'm also going to go into this file here and drag and drop ng Mongo Demo in here. And what I want to do is in here, we'll talk about the format of this. Kill some of this stuff for now. I want to talk about how this came to be and why, and what's the advantage of using Angular. Angular looks easy from the get-go. It's nice. It gives you some good functionality on the front end. What is it? Remove -rf .git git init gits dot commits -m initial commit. Sorry, just hanging that out, and paste that in there. Okay, good. It's pushed. So it seems from the beginning when you start using Angular that it's nice. If you did the Code School tutorial, and most of you have, then you'll notice they explain it very nicely. They explain things about closures. Each module from the Code School video shows a closure, which is an iffy, right? And it's a immediately invoked function expression. We talked about that a bit as well. Let's take a look at that. I'm working off this project COMP2068 ng Mongo Demo from GitHub. If you please take a look there. And notice that there are two partitions, just like last time. We got a public side and a server side, right? We're going to get to this public side in a second. I want to go back to that little PowerPoint that I was using last week. On my public side, I have a scripts folder, and underneath that I have another app.ts, not the same as my app.ts that's inside my server side. Here's my app.ts and server side. It just looks like a regular Node app, right? But my app.ts that's inside on the public side, it shows some examples. I've kind of commented out some stuff here. We're going to go back to that. Some examples of a manually bootstrapped Angular app. And we'll talk about the difference between manual and automatic, right, in a bit. But and how we can add this in. So one part is this app.ts file, and I've made it so that this app.ts file has all the controllers and all the services and all the routes all in one file, right? And what we're going to do today is I want to move this from one file to multiple files. How to break it up into multiple files. We'll try and do that maybe today, maybe next week if I can't get through it today, because from a time perspective. I'll talk about why it's been done this way, right, and what it does. But what I'm doing is it's almost like a mini single-page application within my Express project, right? So my Express app uses views on the server side, right? So I didn't want to get rid of these views. So this is how it came about. So I have my views, and inside the views I have my articles views like we had before, users views. I got some partials. I've modified the partials, and what I've done with the partials to modify them to prepare, this is all prep, by the way. prep. Like to make Angular a part of your app, you need to really split up your partials a little bit, and I'll show you why. Here's my bootstrap, right? Bootstrap partial just has this, bootstrap, right? I have an Angular partial that adds Angular. And by the way, notice there's some stuff that's commented out because I don't need all of that right now, right? So, so Bootstrap, Angular partial, and I also have something called a footer, which is just this. Why? Because what I want to try and do is I want to make it all modular, right? So some of them, some pages are going to just have Bootstrap, no Angular. Other pages could have Angular, no Bootstrap, right? If I really want to, right? Typically, I want both Bootstrap and Angular, but not always, right? So I want to make it modular enough so that way I can include one component or the other, and there's just the footer just adds the last part, so it closes off the entire document. So this is, I had to make some changes to my views in order for me to do that. So even if I look at my regular view, like a login view, now I include my header, I include my nav bar, and at the bottom I have my Bootstrap and the footer to close it off. I didn't have to put it this way. I could have included my footer at the end of all of my documents as well, right? But it's okay. I wanted to do it this way. Now there's many ways to use EJS and this view engine, but this is the way I chose to do it. So I've modified my partials, and I have an area in my views called to-dos. My to-dos, even though it looks like a regular EJS file, is actually a template, right? And remember, if you look at the Code School videos, if you do any of that work, ngView, if you have something that's called ngView, between these two custom directives here, ngView, right, is where the template kicks off. So this is where actually it renders. It renders the template between these two, or within this element right here. We have another area, we have a script tag, and the script tag basically, just like, who's familiar with handlebars? Anybody? If you've done any kind of work with the old handlebars, it looks very similar to this. You have a script tag, and the script tag basically indicates the type of script it is. In this particular case, it's an ng template, so an Angular template, with an ID of /todos.html. So anything from this script tag to this script tag is the actual template. Okay, so this template here, which is a regular to-dos template, is going to render within this ng view. But I could swap out this template for the other one that's down here, which is also another template for to-do details. If I want to get the details of the to-do, then I can use this template down here, up to this script tag, to render in the same view directive, ng view directive in there, inside this custom element here, so that it shows one over the other. So I'm using one page, single page application, for multiple templates, and incorporating it within EJS. Did I have to do that? Absolutely not. You could have made it so that it doesn't render an engine at all. It could have called it from your router. It could have rendered the page directly inside your public folder for that particular, for your to-dos, almost like a little separate application altogether. And that's perfectly fine. I just want me to combine both things into one. So that's why it's written this way. Okay, so I had to change I had to add an EJS template for my to-dos, because we're making a task list, right? That's what the to-dos are. They're just tasks, okay? Inside my routes, in the server side, I have articles, my index, and my to-dos, and my users. And in my to-dos, each one of these to-dos, they're actually rendering JSON data. So they're not actually spitting out any kind of, it's not rendering a page anymore. I'm just spitting out JSON. And I'm consuming the JSON data with my Angular service, right? So the Angular service reads the JSON data and takes that information and spins it into its controller. That's what it does, right? So the controller takes the data that I'm getting from my routes, right, and puts it inside of it. It adds it into the scope. And we'll show you how to do that too, right? So I had to declare a bunch of routes for this, right? And if you notice, it's like, here's your my utility function to make sure that the person who's looking at the to-dos is authenticated. That's what it is. It's the same function as on the other side. I've created a to-do model. So I not only have to do these, but I also have to do a to-do model. I have an article model, looks like this. I have a user model, looks like this, to log in. And I have a to-do model that keeps track of one to-do, or one task. Now this is really important. If you're doing something like a survey, notice that I have multiple models. And if you're doing the survey set for your final project, you may need multiple models. One for all your answer collections. Your answer collection might have one model, answer collection. You might have another collection for your surveys, another collection for your users, you can have many collections as you want. Or if you want to, you can layer one document instead of another. It's up to you how you want to split it off. That's how Mongo is flexible enough so that you can hang yourself if you want to, right? But it's also nice where you can be as flexible and creative as you like as well. Okay, so I had to create a to-dos model as well, and I incorporated that inside my routes. So if I look at my routing again and go to my to-do route, notice that on the top here, I'm importing the to-do model. And then when in the typical request response idea, I'm just spouting out when I do a get, I'm actually reading my to-dos, right? That's what I'm doing, and I'm producing it, in JSON. I'm converting it to JSON. Same thing with the post. When I post something, this is another way you can do it. I can post. This is it creates the to-do for the first time with JSON data, as opposed to the way we did it before. This is a totally different way of doing it, using JSON as opposed to rendering objects that come from, for example, a page that has a form. I have a form on the page. That's typically what you get. You get a bunch of, you get a body. You read the body, and the body has, when you go rec.body.user, and the user information or the whatever information that comes from the page, you post it, use the post method to post it into your Mongo database, right? Here, we're not doing that. We're reading the JSON data, so we don't have a form, right? We're getting it from Angular, right? The Angular single page application, and we're pushing it into the Mongo database with this post from a creation perspective. If I want to read the database, I can do the same thing. I can use a get to read from the database, especially by ID. I'm reading it by ID, so I'm using this to do find by ID inside the database and picking out the ID that's specific to the user and posting it back out in JSON format. So every time I look at stuff from my Angular perspective, I'm always getting a response back in JSON format. I'm taking the data, spinning it around, and throwing it back into my single page application. That's the difference. Now, if you do it this way, I can take my Angular front end and put it on top of a .NET backend. I don't have to go and Node. I can do it wherever I want. And that's why Angular services are so powerful, because you can combine them with something on the Microsoft side called .NET Web API, which is very similar to this. It spouts out JSON, and now all we do on the Angular side is read the JSON, and we spin it into our single page application. Okay. So all this is just reading JSON. And notice I also have a put. I can also use not just post, but put. And a lot of times put is used to update. Post is used to create. Put is used to update. Get is used to read. And delete, if you notice, I can also use a router.delete. Delete is a command that we can use just to remove stuff from the Mongo database. This is built into Mongo. So it's like a post, but it's a specific type of post. Just like put is a post, but it's a specific type of post. It's an update as opposed to a creation. So totally different way of doing things, and so you need the router in order for you to do it. So I need routes, I need a model. Look at all the stuff I have to do to prepare my stuff for Angular. That's why I said it's optional to do Angular for your app, right? It's a lot of work, right? Yeah, so I need a model, I need routes, I need views, I need one view, right? And I also need a custom app.ts file with all basically all my logic, right? So with my controller and my service and my Angular routes that I put in here, all this stuff has to be done. And I did it in one file here for you. But we're going to split it off and do it in separate files in a second. And if you notice, I'm using this method of bootstrapping. Notice on my file, if I go back to my view, right? So if I go back to my views, and if I look at my to-dos view, right? That's my routes. I meant if I go back to my to-dos view, my single page application, notice at the top, right? It's just using the same header. So there is no ng app like you saw on Code School. Code School says when you want to attach an Angular application, you use ng-app. That's the directive that you use to attach the app, and you call it something like app or main or whatever, right? That's automatic bootstrapping. That's what it's called. We're using manual bootstrapping. Manual bootstrapping doesn't use ng-app at all. That directive is unused. The reason why we go manual bootstrapping instead of automatic bootstrapping is because I have a template that I want to use. And unless I want to use more than one header file, header Angular, it's like a lot more work. Like, you know, I want to be able to manually bootstrap. And the way I do that is, I'll bring up the PowerPoint in a second. Inside my app.ts file, inside of this file, you can see that I'm saying this. I'm declaring a variable to name what my app is called. Almost like, you know, that ng app equals to app. That's what this is. This is, what's my main application module name? What is it called? It's called app, right? So let's name it in a variable, right? And then when I'm saying this, I say, well, app then is equal to my module, Angular module, right? And I'm passing in my my main application module name, which is app. This is just declaring an Angular module as normal. And then what I'm listening for is ng root, which is one of the libraries part of Angular. It's a dependency, and ng resource. Ng root allows me to do like routing with Angular, which I do down here. So here's your Angular routing right here. So there's my routes, and this is what the Angular routing looks like. I do a app config, and then inside my route, I use route provider instead of just scope. And then I say, well, when you get a /, then the template URL is to-dos HTML. And by the way, attach a to-do controller on top of that. As opposed to saying to-do controller, ng controller equals to-do controller. I don't have to do that. I can use a service for this. And you saw this actually. If you did all the modules in your code school, you would have seen that they can do that. You can create your own service. In this particular case, it's something we call a factory, right? And in this factory service, we use a to-do controller instead. So we can do this. So template URL is to-dos HTML, and my controller is my to-dos controller. So whenever I want to go to /, just a regular / for to-dos, I go to to-dos.html. And that's the template. And remember, going back to this, has to follow all the routing, right? If you want to follow this around. In my index.ejs, I say, well, if it's the to-dos HTML, this is the template. So this is what's going to render here inside the ng view custom element, right? Okay, I'm showing you how complex it can be, right? And then here's my to-do details. If I'm looking for a specific ID, I render the other template, and I use a to-do detail controller as opposed to the regular to-do controller, and I specify those two controllers right here inside the same document. Here's my to-do controller, and again, if you look at it, it's app.controller. That's the declaration. And I say specify the name of the controller, to-do controller, and here are the dependencies: scope and to-dos. Now, what is to-dos? What is that? Where does that come from? Well, it comes from my app factory service, which I've named to-dos, which reads in JSON data. This is the stuff that is able to read the resource from the path, which is JSON data, take it, turn it into an object called to-dos, and spin it into the to-do controller or to the to-do detail controller. That's how it works, right? If you try to combine this with Express in different ways, it's actually more complex and more messy than this, believe it or not. That's why I haven't made it, mandatory. Angular to do right, I need a whole semester with people who know JavaScript very well, right? Without anything to do with Node, right? Even if I didn't have the chance to do your code school, I want to give you a bit of a taste of it. That's what the idea is for front-end frameworks, right? But it can be a lumbering beast if you don't know how to do things. And by the way, like I said last time, I think, right? If you think that Angular 2 is easier, the answer is absolutely not, right? Angular 2 actually, even though that you know TypeScript, is actually a beast and a half, right? It's like they've gone really far. It's nice what they're trying to do at Microsoft and Google. They're pushing the limits of emerging technologies to really do something great, right? And what they've done with Angular 2 is they made it 3 to 5 times faster in terms of response time than Angular 1, right? Fantastic, but it's a totally different modular system. It uses something called a component system that's totally different than Angular 1, right? With a whole different set of, first of all the controllers in Angular 1 that we use, they're gone. They don't exist in Angular 2. There's no controllers anymore, right? Like it is a new beast. It's not an upgrade. It's not like, hey, I've got Angular 1 and now I can go to Angular 2 and I'm good. No. Everything you know about Angular 1, don't worry about it. Angular 2 is totally different. Like learning React, right? Apples and oranges. So I'm not trying to dissuade you from doing it. I think it's great. I think you have some really cool things, and I'll show you what you get after this. So let's see what this little thing builds now. So we've got this, again, using this ng Mongo demo. and I'll talk about manual bootstrapping in a second. And we'll do a little test with it, so it's more realistic, so you can bite into it a little bit more, because there's a lot of stuff I'm giving you here. But let's take a look at this thing. So I'm going to run gulp. Oh, by the way, before I run gulp, I've also updated my gulp to have 2 tasks. I have 2 compile tasks. One that compiles inside the server, and the other one that compiles inside the public folder. Why? You can't do both, right? With one task, it's hard, right? So I have 2 tasks that run 2 different compilation processes, because I have TypeScript files in both the server side and the public side. Unless you don't care about TypeScript, and I do, because I you know what? I'm an addict, right? If I don't have TypeScript in my veins, people, I'm in trouble, like coffee, right? And so because of that, I have to transpile both sides. And so I've updated the gulp.js file for this one, which might be useful for you guys because it produces 0 errors, not like the one that I had up before. Let's take a look at this one. This is kind of cool. And it also does a live reload and all that stuff. Okay. So a little bit different. So let's try gulp and see what it does. So I say gulp. Comes up, brings up my pages. I'm up and going. This is something you've seen before, this Mongo demo. I probably should change the name of this to NG Mongo demo, right? Just because I've changed it. I want to log in. So I log into my page. Some minor changes here. My login is Conan, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I log in. Everything's good. I got access to my users, right? Some other people asked access this before. I added their own stuff for testing, I'm sure, right? If I want to get rid of a user like this guy, right? Go in here and delete, right? Gone, right? Anyways, but let's just say I have these 2 users here, Tom and Conan, whatever. Notice that I have access to my to-dos here because I'm logged in. So if I click on to-dos, right? And if everything goes well, without breaking, don't break, didn't break at home, but breaking, this is bad. Oh, there it is. That was a long time. So, you know, here at, you know, thing, I've got my little to-do list, and I notice I have my new to-do. That was from yesterday. I can mark it as completed, right? And if I come back here, if I go to users, so I render user, come back to to-dos, persists. If I want to add another one, but you can add one too, right? Go ahead, log in and add your own, right? And if I want to add my own, mark the do all the marking. How about this? Do all the marking. Do all the marking, right? And then, you know, create, right? And so I got do all the marking as my to-do, right? And if I want to see my to-dos, how do I see that? Remember, I get them through JSON, so I can go back to my thing here, and I know the way it works. I can look at my to-dos, and I can see the JSON data that comes up. My to-dos are all the to-dos that I got, right? All right, so there's my to-dos, and you can see that there's another person that created his own to-do, but I killed him. I killed his account, right? That's his right there. So I can't see his to-do, but I can see my 2 to-dos because of the way I've put together my demo, right? So, or him or her. So that's the JSON data that I'm getting back, right, from my you know, my to-dos route. Now you're like, hey, where's that to-dos route come from? Where is that coming from, right? Well, the to-dos route, if I go back, this is the complexity that I'm talking about, right? Let's take a look. So I go back to server. On the app.ts file, I've added in some other things, right? Let's take a look at them. Here's my to-dos route. My to-dos route's here. And then the bottom, when I tell it what to do, I say, whenever you get to-dos, what I just typed in, go to the to-dos route, right? So I go back to routes, and like this is typical, right? So here's to-dos, and that means my to-dos now becomes my /, which is my get, and what am I returning? JSON, right? So I'm getting JSONs. I'm reading my to-do. I'm using to-do.find, right? So I'm finding all the data from the database. So I'm not specifying what I'm looking for, and I'm returning it all. I'm spitting it back out. So I'm getting all the data here. Make sense? I could have done to-dos by ID, which really would only spit out the data for me, not for everybody, right? But I'm using all to-dos, the entire to-do list, right? Questions around this, around what I'm doing here? So it's a hodgepodge, you know, kind of mess, right? I've got a bunch of different things here. I'm gonna talk about them so you understand. So I've got stuff where you log in. I have to be logged in to see my to-dos list. If I log out, and if I go back to the origin here, so I go back to normal, notice that there's no to-dos here. And if I want to look at to-do list, like we did before, it's secure. So I go to-do list, take me back to login. Same thing with to-dos. If I want to look at that JSON data, and if I want to look at to-dos, log in. It won't let me log in. It won't let me see that data unless I'm logged in, right? But after I've logged in, log in. What? Who is Apple? Who logged in just now? Who made this? Right? I'll delete you. No, I'm joking. Someone's. When you log in, you have access to all this stuff. I have access to see the user list. This is the admin. I could have assigned a role, so only I can look at it. Only one person can see the admin list. If you're not just logged in, but it's looking for a specific user, admin, right? And if you're not the admin user, you can't see the user list. I could do that. You can specify that. It's very easy. If username is admin, show this. Otherwise, no, not authorized, right? As a user role, as opposed to just a username. It's not just enough to be logged in. You won't even see this thing if you're not the right person, okay? And if you try and go there, it'll kick you out because you're not the right person. So again, I can see articles. Everyone can see articles all the time. You can make your own articles. It's anonymous, right? In this particular app we've made, users have to be logged in, and you have access to create users, right? To-dos, you have to be logged in, but you can only see your own to-dos. Notice I see only mine. And if you logged in, you wouldn't see this. You'd see only your own, right? But that's not because they don't exist and you can't see them. So again, I can see all of them. If I go to to-dos, I can see that there's 3 right now, but I only have 2 listed on mine because I'm filtering, right? I'm filtering so I can only see my own, right? So I can see my own, and you can see your own, but you can't see mine, right? If you log in and make your own to-do, right? And that's the kind of thing I made. By the way, if you think about the technology that I'm doing here, this is a lot of stuff that you might need if you're going to use Angular for a front end. If you're doing a survey site, NC management, whatever, you could use this nicely. But there's a bit of setup, and I'm not going to lie to you. There's a bit of overhead to put things together for Angular to make it work properly if you don't know what you're doing. Now, I've given you this example so you can take it and run, right? If you need to use it, run, use it. I'm not going to say anything if you use my example. Just don't call it to-dos. Can't be. Make it surveys, right? Make a survey model, right? Use the same idea. Make a survey model with a single-page application. It's not that difficult to make, right? If you really want to use Angular, there's some bonus points for you right here, right? But don't go too crazy. And again, I had to modify my navbar partial because my navbar partial needs to use it to-dos as well. I have to be included in there. And by the way, my navbar is still pretty darn ugly in terms of the way it works, right? I'm not as slick and cool as Ari. Ari came up with a much nicer, cooler way of doing his navbar with EJS, right? And it's just a matter of honing down which parts you need and then removing the other parts. I've got a lot of duplication in mine. But that's one. The other thing is this idea of editing. I mean, I can edit inline right here, right? Where I can change my to-do, my new to-do to my new to-do too, right? And then update. And then it updates and it's persistent, right? No problem. And I can, check it or uncheck it. Notice that it says 1 to-dos of 2 remaining. So it actually keeps track of how many are completed and how many are still need to be completed. For example, if I complete this one as well, you can see that I have 0 to-dos of 2 remaining, but it still shows me the ones that have been completed. And I can get rid of them or uncomplete them or whatever I want to do. Or delete them, like out of order too, like this one, remove. Bye, right? It's gone. Doesn't even ask you, do you want to remove this one? No, it's gone, right? So this is kind of an example of how to do it, and it's using the new Passport Local Mongoose system as opposed to the other older Passport Local. Again, there's an example of that online if you want to take a look. It's called auth to do, and that's the previous version. If you're not someone who can make Passport Local Mongoose work for whatever reason and you want to use the older one, it's okay. There's 2 examples up online like that. So here's something that I want to ask you guys, right? I want to use the to-dos. I want to talk about manual bootstrapping for a second, and we can get that from the PowerPoint that I was showing you last week. If I was going to look at this PowerPoint, from this one. Manual bootstrapping is very interesting because it gives us more control instead of using the whole ng app idea, right? We'll talk about external modules in a second. But let's take a look at this manual bootstrapping stuff, not dependency injection. You guys know about this stuff. This talks about where Angular got dependency injection, right? Again, remember from a dependency injection perspective, you can always see how this is called chaining, right? You can do a module and the controller all on one line, right? You can do this, but just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. I don't really recommend this methodology. It's a little bit too compressed for me, right? And if you're a beginner using Angular, it can be really confusing, right? So please, yes, you can do this, Angular module, and then controller, and kind of tack on the controller on top of your module. That's cool if you have a single module and a single controller and a single functionality. It's okay. Don't recommend. And I always go back to that gun idea. The gun, right? You have a gun at home. Just doesn't mean just because you have a gun and you can use it doesn't mean you should shoot somebody, right? Right? Same idea here. Just because you have a means to do it doesn't mean you should do it, right? And it's a bad example, but it's to the point. I mean, it tells you that, you know, it can be quite dangerous. So directives, stuff that you already know. This is just a review. But bootstrapping is very interesting. Bootstrapping, there's two. There's automatic bootstrapping, right, where we use that ng app kind of directive, and then manually bootstrapping, which is when you want more control. And the way we do that, of course, is there's a general form for it, and it looks like this. This is manual bootstrapping. You have your main application module name, and then you have something called Angular element, whatever Angular element you're bootstrapping to. In this particular case, it's the whole document. You can specify whatever element you make a reference to. So let's say, for example, you have a reference. You want to bootstrap onto a particular div tag, right? You can say this div tag has an ID, and you can do something like, I don't know, document.getElement by ID to create a reference to that particular div tag. And let's say I name that div tag myElement. So instead of it being Angular.element document, it could be Angular.element myElement, whatever element you want to choose to bootstrap your core functionality on, right? And then you're waiting here for the document to be ready because Angular uses something called JQLite, a built-in version of jQuery that's a light version of jQuery that's included in Angular, right? So when you do the .ready, it's just like using jQuery's .ready function, right? And that's what this does. And then what I'm saying is use the bootstrap command, angular.bootstrap. By the way, please don't confuse bootstrap with Twitter bootstrap, the CSS framework. This is bootstrapping here means attaching functionality to your code. That's what it means. Not let's add some CSS and make our site bootstrappy. No, we're not talking about that. I'm talking about adding functionality here. So notice that it says again, it's attaching it to the document, and then square brackets means add all the required modules that I need, and the only module that I need here to work is the mean module. In our case, it would be called app, right? We called it mean instead of mean. We're calling it our ng app is equal to app, right? And that's what you see in the code school examples. Okay, that's one piece that you can definitely use. What else do I want to talk about here? Automatic bootstrapping. Yeah. So let's give an example of this. So we'll break our code for a little bit. So here's our code. And what I want to do is I want to take a look at that route, right? So our routes go to, here's our routing. If I'm logged in, I go to the /, and this / means take a look at your to-dos, right? That's what this does. If I want my to-dos list, I actually get that from my index.ts file. So if I go back to my index.ts file, notice that when I do a router.get to-dos list or to-do list, I need to be authorized, I need to be logged in. I can't look at my to-do list if I'm not logged in, right? And I'm going to render. Here's my template. I'm going to render an EJS template. It's inside the to-dos folder under the index.ejs. This is where we get our template going, right? And my title, of course, is to-dos. My display name is, if it's there, it's going to show. If not, I won't show. And also, I want to keep track of something called username, because not just my display name, because I want to filter my to-dos by username, right? Because my username is part of the database. I don't want to show other users other people's to-dos. They only have access to their own tasks. That's why I pass in the username variable here, all right? So let's change this. Let's go into under views. And again, I recommend that you download my code here for a second. And let's get rid of all this. Let's just comment it all out, right? And I'll show you what I'm talking about here so you can see. So I'm going to comment it out. And I'm going to comment all of this out from here all the way down to the bottom one where the script is. That's commented out. And notice it's not showing commented out because it's an EJS file. But don't worry about that. Let's take a look at what my, now that I've uploaded, let's take a look. Did my stuff transpile? It did, right? It restarted, right? At 1343, right? 1343. That means it restarted. When I just changed my EJS file, it restarted, right? That's good. Let's check and see what it looks like now. If I refresh, every time I refresh, I got to log in because it logs me out. It kills my session when I reboot my server, right? So let's get in there again. So hopefully you guys didn't delete me. I'm in, Apple, right? And I want to look at my to-dos, and I see what happened. How come my to-dos are still showing up? And how come I see do all the marking and I don't, it hasn't broken my code? Well, let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go back into my code here, and again, notice that I've changed my index.ejs. Right here it is. I've saved it, but somehow it didn't work. Well, because I'm using the wrong kind of comments. How about them? How about them apples? Tom. And I have to keep doing it all, right? So let's do this one too. So I'll do no. And of course, it already has it there, so I can't do it twice. Let's do that over here. That's what I meant to do. Yes, Tom. Yes, Tom. And then do it again. Comment all that out to here. Oh, it's a mess and a half. It's a mess and a half, guys. How about this? How about just erase it and put it into some kind of notepad? That's probably easier. Yes, that might be the easier way. I'm going to open up a something else. Let's open up. Trying to think of what to open up. Brackets. Let's open up brackets. Something else, and we'll kick off a new file that I'll call nothing. And that's not what I want to. I don't know why they copied that. Got that. Copy that out. There we go. Go back to brackets, and there we go. So I have a copy of this, so I'm going to go back there in a second. All right, let's. What I want to do is just get rid of all this, just so the spacing is gone. And notice my partial, my code here has nothing inside of it anymore, right? So I have no partial anymore. Now that I've saved, I can see that I've transpiled again. I just finished connecting, and I'm going to go back to my code here and refresh. I got to kind of join. Log in. Here I am, and I go back to to-dos, and I see nothing, right? Because I killed all that work. That's my single-page application I broke, right? Okay, to demonstrate Angular, remember that I have my controller. I have my controller that's already preset up here inside my public app.ts, right? And in my controller, first of all, I've manually bootstrapped everything right here. That's the first piece. I declare a factory service. That's right here. But in my controller, I have a to-do controller, right? And I need scope. I need access to my to-dos. And notice that I have scope editing and scope username and scope user to-dos and blah, 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 right? Well, let's say I want to have access to my scope username. How do I set that up in the old way of doing Angular? So who remembers their code school stuff? I want to set up a div tag. Here's my, double click there. So here's my in EJS file. I want to set up a div tag. And without templating, here's my div tag. I want to add in a, turn on HTML for a second. I want to turn on, I want to make this, anything between this div tag, I want to add in this to-do controller. How do I do it? Going back to code school. Show me what to do. I want to attach the to-do controller on this div tag. This is like Angular 101. Come on, guys. I have to start pointing at people. Okay, Ari, tell me, what do I do? No. So use the directive ng-controller, right? Remember, it's already bootstrapped. We don't have to worry about ng-app because that's manually bootstrapping is done. Now I just have to point out where I want my controller to take place, right? So ng-controller is equal to to-do controller, right? And if you notice, if I go back to my app.ts, to-do controller is what the controller is called. So we just named the controller that we want to use. Think about the controller as a function that I want to attach to a particular code block, right? So here's my div tag. I want to take that functionality and make it accessible to that piece of code, right? To that code block, that element, if you will, right? All right, now that I've got that, I've got access to this. I've declared this div tag is where I'm going to put things. I want to put in my an h1 tag, and inside of my h1 tag, I want to put the username, right? So I use my mustaches here, and I go username, right? Why just username? Because if I look at my app.ts, scope is a variable that holds a bunch of different properties. Think about scope as an object, right? And scope has a username property, and right now the username is blank, right? Here's what I don't want to happen. I don't want to get my curly braces back. If I get my curly braces back inside my application, that means Angular is not connected somehow. Sorry for that interruption. There's a party next door, right? Literally, like people are like, ha ha ha. Anyways, I like parties too, but damn, it's hard to teach with that. So username is just a property of the scope, right? And I can dynamically add whatever property I want onto the scope by mentioning it here. So username is the property. What if I wanted to add another property like Tom, right? I don't know, I'm making it up, right? So I do something like this. Instead of, I can do scope Tom is equal to Tom, right? There we go. I added it into my scope, right? Cool. And in my index, instead of my username, let's put in Tom, right? So like this. What I should get back is Tom, capital T. Let's see if that's true. Remember, we can't get to this, though, unless we're logged in, because we have our routing still in place. Nothing's changed. So if I go back to my code here, refresh, it's going to log us out. Go back in. Log in. If everything goes well, if I go to to-dos, then I get Tom. See that for a second it was there, and then it disappeared? That's Angular 1. Angular 2, 2 seconds. Like not even like a tenth of a second. You wouldn't even see that. What's happening there is it's converting from the template that we put in to my data. My data is being read. My controller is being applied to this template. Right? That's what's happening. And you see that momentarily. You see that if you see the mustaches momentarily, that's what's happening. So Tom appears there because I'm passing in data from my scope. And scope is just a dynamic object that I can keep adding stuff to. In fact, I can add things like functions to scope, right? And that's what I'm doing down here. So if you look at inside my controller, I have something called setUsername, right? So where I get a username, whatever it is, and I'm passing in the username object, username capital N, right? Where am I getting this from? Right? Well, it's a parameter, and what I'm saying is, well, my username is going to be username, right? So set username is a method. Well, how do I fix this up? What do I mean by this? Like, how do I set the this function to work, right? Well, again, I can call set username as a function inside my code somewhere in a directive, right? Where I can pass in the data, right, through my my code. So that's one thing I can do. The same thing I can do with save. Save does something. If I call the save function, it actually saves my data back onto it, pushes my data back onto the to-do train, right? Goes back onto Mongo, right? Same thing with update and edit and cancel and remove. Remove will remove the data. It also shows my remaining to-dos, what remaining to-dos are, calculates how many there are left, the ones that are left unchecked, right? That's what it does. And it also calculates my total to-dos, right, by user. Right? So it says, hey, how many total to-dos are there for each of my to-dos? Take a look at the username, and if the username is equal to the user, then count it. Otherwise, don't. That's what it does, right? And that's how it counts the total to-dos by user, right? So each of these methods, by the way, I'm using TypeScript, a fat arrow notation here, which again is equivalent to function, anonymous function, with a curly bracket, right? So if you actually looked at the JavaScript version, right, you can see that the JavaScript version uses the function notation as opposed to the TypeScript version. I just think the TypeScript version is a little easier, and again, I'm addicted to TypeScript, so I always use it, but I understand the differences. Okay, so that's how you attach a controller. We talked about that, and I've added this silly piece of data here, right, Tom. But what if I want to see my username? I'm logged in, and I don't need to do that. I can just put username in there again. So I'm going to go back into my my index.ejs, And I want to wrap this not just in a div tag that has ng controller, but I also wanted to apply a class of container, which is part of my Bootstrap class, because I'm using both Bootstrap and Angular here in my example, right? Here's my Tom. Instead of Tom, I put username, and I'm reading the username right from my the to-dos that come from my database, right? So again, I've refreshed. If I refresh again, got to log in again. It kills my session. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Log in. When I go back to to-dos, you can see that username is gone. How come? How come I don't see a username here, right? I have a username, and it was picking up before, but now username is blank. Why? Because my actual to-do, the actual document that I built before with my that basically shows your to-dos and all that stuff, it reads the database for me, right? It does, hey, read the database and get your user information from the database, and depending on who's logged in, take that information and put it attached to the scope. And that's by that that function that we've connected, which is, read username or set username, whatever the username is. This is the function that does that, right? And if you look at the way it's done, here's my template, right? I do this, ng init, on init, when this div starts off, call the ng init directive and kick off set username. And what am I passing in there? I'm using EJS in quotations to pass in the username that I'm getting from the route that passes into this function that sets my username in the scope of Angular. That's what's happening here. You're laughing. Why? It is. But because I'm combining EJS, it's crazy. I'm combining EJS and Angular, and I need to do this ng init in order for me to do that. Let's try this out here. So I'll just copy this line, ng init, and I want to pass in this information in here, right? And I want to do this after we declare our controller, right? So we've got our controller, and then I'm going to pass this in back into EJS, right? So got my controller, and then in the same line, I also do one of these, right? ng init, set username, right? Set username is part of my controller. Will this work? Let's see. And what will I get instead? Going back to here, fresh, log in. Okay, look at my to-dos. And I get Conet, right? So what it did was it went out to it took the username that came in from my route, right? Fed it into Angular and attached to the scope variable. And now in those curly braces, I'm spitting out the scope variable back inside my h1 tag. Okay? So this is the idea of two-way data binding, right? Where I'm getting information from my route, spitting it back out. And that's exactly what we're doing with the factory. I'm getting information from my JSON data, inputting it into my user, into my local scope here inside this area, spitting it back out inside the tag that I want to use. So Angular in a nutshell. All right, it's not really a nutshell, okay? But I was showing you, right? So let's make it so we break up Angular. So we've done Angular in one big file. Let's break it up so it uses multiple files. And I've kind of set all that up already. Let's just put everything back the way it was. So I'm going to kind of copy this, go back over here, go to here, go to my my index.ejs, kill these two things, put that back in, save it, go in here, refresh. That's pretty fast, too fast. Let's refresh again, kicked out, good. Momentarily, I saw it though, which is bad. And then I'm out. Go back in. Here's my to-dos, and there's my to-do that's read from the database. So it kept it all in there. Great. I want this same functionality, but I don't want it to be in one continuous file because that's really ugly. And if you have a lot of stuff going on, it'll be a pain in the ass. So how do I do that? Well, I've already got the structure in place. So if you want to see how to break up your files, in scripts, I have something called to-dos, a folder in there called to-dos, and I have something called controllers. And all I've done is commented out the entire controller. It's the exact same controller as I had before. Let's pull this out, just so you can see it. And all the way to the bottom. And the reason why I've done it this way is I've kind of done a couple things. One is this. I'm declaring a module name of to-do controllers, so lowercase to-do controllers. And then I'm saying var app, and this app, by the way, because it's inside this immediately invoked function expression, or IFI, is different than the app that's inside the other files. This is just local, right? I'm saying this, app is equal to Angular module, pass in the module name to do controllers, right? So once I've mentioned the module name and it's in my scope, I can have some dependencies, ng route for Angular routing, ng resource, I need that too. My to-do services, which is my module, and also my to-do routes. Those are all the things I need to make everything work. Inside my to-do controller, I have my regular controller in here, just like I had it read before. So this is nothing different here. So save. So I've got my controller working. Let's do the same thing for my services. Just going to uncomment here. And save. I'm going to do the same thing for my config. My config is where my routing is happening. This is we usually call it config, not routes for Angular. There we go. So my routes are all there. Everything's the same as it was before, just like partitioned in different files. Now, this is not going to work. This is not going to work because there's a couple of problems. One, in my app.ts, I have all this stuff, and it's already set up. This has to stay like this, but notice that instead of working in a single file, like with just ng root and ng resource, I have to also include to-do routes, to-do services, and to-do controllers, because those are the modules that I'm going to load in as dependencies inside my app. So now I can comment out this whole section. So let's see if that works. Don't need all this stuff because it's all in one root. There we go. So this is commented out, and all I need in this page is this top part. All right, so I'll uncomment this piece. So this top part is that works in multiple modules, right? So I've commented this other stuff off, and I've uncommented this piece. We're still not done. We also need to go into my views and into my partials and into my Angular, and I need to uncomment this too, right? Because these modules have to be added in, just like you saw in the code school video. Every time you use your own custom modules, you need to include them in your index.html because your index.html functions as your manifest that ties all your Angular modules together. If you don't do that, then it won't work properly. And I'll save that too. Now, if we've done everything correctly, and by the way, I don't know if we have, right? It should work just like we did before. May not, and if we don't, we'll get some errors we can fix. Let's see. So here it ran, it did a bunch of recompiles a bunch of times, right? And let's see if we're going to run now. So I'm going to go back up into here, refresh, we get a login. So far it's working. The to-do piece may not work, and we'll see what happens when we go to to-dos. Hey, it works fine, right? And we can add our own stuff in there. Let's add a new to-do. Let's test it, right? Here's a new one. Create. There it is. I can tap this out as well, and I can delete this one. So all this functionality works. It only does this one. If I want to look at my to-dos list, I should see only the ones that belong to me, because someone else has logged in and deleted their own, right? Somehow. And there we go. So now here's what I've got an example here, and I'm going to upload this to GitHub now, just the changes that I made of my same Angular application just broken up into multiple files. So I've got two versions up here that I've shown you. One with one file controlling everything, right? And another one where I've broke up my controllers, my service, and my routes into separate files in different folders, okay? And everything gets transpiled and everything through gulp at the end. So let's do that, and then I'll end for the day, and then I'll sit with everybody else. Any questions around Angular, right? So I can't impose on you enough, for those people who aren't asking any questions, I can't impose on you enough that this is serious, right? If you want to go down the Angular route, I'm going to give you bonus points to do it, okay? Guaranteed. There's bonus points involved. But it's not easy, and please, it's not for the meek. You really have to know what you're doing and want to do it, and there's got to be a good reason why you're doing it to add functionality. Please don't do it just for the same of doing it because you want to create a mean stack app and the course is really around mean stack. I'm giving you the option just to do an Express app, and that's totally fine. Or let's say you're more akin to doing it with React or some other front-end framework. Let me know. I'll accept those as well. But Angular and even any other front-end framework is difficult if you don't know what to do, especially within a real application. Let me add those changes in. So I'll say split Angular app into modules. All right, so this version should be up online in a second, and you can download this thing and incorporate it as you like on your own. Okay. Otherwise, guys, that's it for me. I'm going to start off going from group to group, and the rest of the day, I'm going to start talking to everybody and marking you guys on how you're doing right now. And this first part, so final project part 1 is what I'm looking at today, and I want to look at part 2 and see how you're doing which is due Friday. Yeah. So let's take a look at those pieces as well.